History isn't always written with ink. Sometimes it's carved in screams, echoes, and secrets buried beneath ancient sands. Tonight, we step into the roaring arenas of ancient Rome, where glory belonged to the victorious, and nightmares belong to the forgotten. Behind the cheers, steel, and sand lies a truth far more horrifying than death itself. The gladiatorial arena was far more than a battleground of muscle, weapons, and courage. It was a stage crafted to satisfy the darkest appetites of imperial entertainment, a living theater where human dignity was traded for spectacle. Inside the Roman Empire, the idea of punishment and humiliation was not constrained by empathy or moral boundaries, especially when directed at individuals considered enemies, slaves, or trophies of conquest. The sand of the arena was stained with much more than blood. It carried the weight of despair, broken identity, and ritualized cruelty that extended far beyond the clash of swords. Captive women, stripped of status and choice, were thrust into a world where their existence served a single purpose: to provide an emotional and psychological display of suffering that fed an audience conditioned to crave extremes. The Romans believed that in order for a spectacle to be unforgettable, it needed to provoke gasps, fear, and twisted fascination, pushing human behavior outside the limits of ordinary imagination. For the crowd, the humiliation and torment of captives, especially women who represented foreign identities or conquered cultures, became a form of symbolic domination. Even before stepping onto the arena floor, the psychological torment began. Captives were held in underground chambers known as the hypogeum, where daylight rarely penetrated, and every sound echoed with uncertainty. The psychological warfare was intentional. Isolation, confusion, and deprivation served as invisible weapons that weakened the mind long before any physical threat. These women were forced to listen to the distant roar of audiences celebrating others' suffering, never knowing if the next scream belonged to a stranger or someone they once knew. The unpredictability of fate became its own form of torture, slowly eroding hope until submission felt like the only remaining identity. The Roman arena thrived not only on death, but on the fear that preceded it. A person completely aware of their execution may face it with resignation, but a person unsure whether tomorrow holds freedom, survival, humiliation, or horror experiences a deeper psychological fracture. Captive women were used to represent conquered nations, displayed not as individuals, but as symbols. This dehumanization created an emotional spectacle where the crowd did not see a terrified person, but rather a living announcement of Roman power. Every gasp, tear, or tremble was interpreted not as suffering, but as entertainment. The audience was not merely watching an event, they were participating in the erasure of another's soul. The gladiators themselves, though admired, were also prisoners of the same system. Yet they stood above these women in the hierarchy of oppression, because they still possessed a fragment of honor, skill, and identity. The contrast between a warrior and a helpless captive amplified the psychological spectacle. When the arena demanded humiliation instead of death, it crossed into a space where survival was not a blessing, but an extended nightmare. In a culture where spectacle mattered more than mercy, fear itself became the main attraction. The arena was designed not only to showcase physical combat, but to push the boundaries of how far humiliation and suffering could be manipulated for spectacle. Romans believed that true entertainment lay in extremes, and captive women were placed at the very bottom of this hierarchy, often forced into circumstances where the loss of dignity was intentional. Crafted and encouraged by those in power, the audience demanded novelty, shock, and emotional escalation, and those orchestrating the games understood that psychological degradation was sometimes more impactful than physical harm. Captive women became instruments through which the empire displayed its dominance, not through swift punishment, but through prolonged and orchestrated humiliation that blurred the line between performance and cruelty. Their identity, history, and humanity were stripped away, not simply by force, but by turning their existence into a public narrative controlled entirely by Rome. Different roles were assigned not based on skill, but on the perceived entertainment value of their emotional response. A terrified woman became a dramatic prop, her fear serving as the script, while the crowd reacted not with sympathy, but with fascination. The spectacle reflected an environment where morality was suspended and replaced with the thrill of watching despair unfold. The humiliation was calculated, not chaotic, engineered to attack the mind rather than just the body. Even their appearance was manipulated to reflect vulnerability or exaggerate helplessness, turning them into characters rather than people. In these staged scenes, Dignity was intentionally and methodically dismantled so that the audience could witness not just suffering, but the unraveling of a human spirit in real time. The Roman mindset valued power, displayed through dominance, and the suffering of captive women acted as proof that Rome had broken not only nations, but the individuals who represented them. While gladiators could win admiration through strength, captives were denied any pathway to honor. This created a contrast that highlighted Roman control over life, reputation, and memory. The worst fate was not death, but to be remembered only as a spectacle, never as a person. Their stories, if they ever had the chance to be told, were overwritten by the exaggerated reactions the audience saw and interpreted. The amphitheater became a psychological execution ground where fear became currency and humiliation served as the climax of the show. The most disturbing element was that humiliation was not viewed as cruelty but as entertainment, tradition, and cultural pride. Children, adults, and elites alike watched with normalized detachment, reinforcing the idea that value was determined by status, not humanity. The more emotionally broken the captive appeared, the more successful the spectacle was considered. These women existed within a system where every reaction, every tear, every moment of panic was absorbed, interpreted, and celebrated by a viewing crowd that believed they were witnessing something thrilling, rather than something tragic. In this environment, humiliation became a performance that trapped its victims in a role they could not escape, while the crowd left satisfied, unaware or uncaring that the deepest wounds inflicted were ones that could never be seen. From the arena floor darker side of gladiator culture revealed that the Roman craving for spectacle extended beyond the arena floor and became a reflection of an empire, where moral boundaries were fluid, shifting, or entirely absent when confronted with power. Entertainment was not simply a pastime. It was a cultural engine that shaped identity, politics, and social hierarchy. The lives of captive women were absorbed into the system, where fear and humiliation were transformed into public celebration. The cruelty they endured was not the result of a few malicious individuals, but rather the natural outcome of a society conditioned to interpret suffering as art, dominance as virtue, and silence as compliance. These events shaped the psychology of the masses, reinforcing the belief that those without status did not deserve agency, respect, or even private suffering. The arena became a mirror reflecting what humanity is capable of when empathy is stripped away and replaced with collective appetite. The absence of moral boundaries created an environment where even those who were not naturally cruel could become desensitized witnesses. As long as the empire benefited from the illusion of strength, the cost was irrelevant. The degradation of those at the bottom of society was justified through cultural logic. They had no citizenship, no value, and therefore no rights over their fate. Once this belief system was normalized, it became easy for the audience, rulers, and even the participants to see the spectacle not as cruelty, but as entertainment sanctioned by tradition. The most terrifying aspect was not the individual acts of oppression, but how ordinary citizens learned to find excitement in the psychological and emotional dismantling of human beings. This moral erosion did not occur suddenly. It evolved slowly, embedded in rituals, festivals, and political messages that presented dominance as destiny. Within this atmosphere, the captive women represented a living boundary marker, demonstrating how far the empire could push control without fear of consequence. No one questioned whether the suffering was justified because the system rewarded public silence and applause while punishing empathy. In this sense, the true horror was not confined to the victims' experiences, but extended to the cultural transformation of the spectators themselves. The desire for entertainment expanded until there was no clear line separating performance from punishment or justice from cruelty. Every humiliation reinforced Rome's identity as unstoppable, authoritative, and superior, and that identity mattered more than the lives sacrificed to maintain it.